In the 1930s, airplanes were still built more like furniture than machines of war. Skilled hands shaped every part, bolts fitted by feel, rivets hammered one by one. Factories in Europe looked more like workshops. Every plane was a project. In Germany, that fit their pride. Messerschmitt, Heinkel, Junkers, names that stood for precision. The Luftwaffe's new fighters and bombers were fast, sleek, deadly. The Bf 109 could outclimb almost anything. The Stuka could dive like a screaming hawk. Each machine was sharp, but each one took time. Production was measured in dozens, not thousands. But Hitler didn't care. Blitzkrieg didn't need endless reserves, he believed. Just shock, speed, and terror. Strike hard and fast, and the war would be over before production even mattered. And for a time, that illusion held. Poland fell in weeks. France collapsed in 6. Across Europe, the Luftwaffe seemed unstoppable. But across the Atlantic, a different vision was already taking shape. America's Army Air Corps was small, underfunded, even outdated. But America had something Germany underestimated: the assembly line. Henry Ford had already shown the world what mass production could do. Model Ts had rolled off lines by the millions, a car every minute. Steel, oil, parts, labor, all flowing like clockwork. What if that same method could build airplanes? Most experts laughed. Airplanes weren't cars, too fragile, too complex. The B-24 Liberator alone had more than 450,000 parts and 5 miles of wiring. Precision fitting, constant adjustments, delicate tolerances. Impossible, aviation men said. Planes will never be built like cars. But Henry Ford was not a man who listened to impossible. In 1940, as Europe burned and Britain begged for help, Ford promised something outrageous. His company would mass-produce heavy bombers, not hundreds, thousands. A bomber not in months, but in minutes. To skeptics, it was madness. To Ford, it was destiny. Meanwhile, in Berlin, the idea was dismissed. Hitler and Göring sneered. America was a nation of playboys, they said. Good for cars and chewing gum, but not for warplanes. The Americans can build cars, Hitler scoffed, but they cannot build planes like we can. It was one of the greatest miscalculations of the war. Even before Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt had called America the arsenal of democracy. Contracts flowed to Douglas, Boeing, and Consolidated. And in Michigan, Ford broke ground on something the world had never seen: Willow Run, a factory a mile long, the largest roof on Earth, a plant designed not to craft airplanes, but to pour them out like water. For Germany, still betting on precision and handcraft, it was unthinkable. For America, it was just the beginning. No one in Berlin yet understood what was coming. They thought Blitzkrieg would be enough. They thought America was too soft, too slow, too divided. But they were wrong, fatally wrong. The storm was already rising, and when it broke, German commanders would be stunned, not by what America had in 1941, but by what it could build in 1943, 1944, and 1945. In 1940, as Europe burned, Henry Ford made a promise no one believed. He would build bombers, not in dozens, not in hundreds, in thousands, and he would build them like cars, on an assembly line. To the aviation world, it sounded insane. Airplanes were art, machines of precision. Every rivet mattered. Every wing had to be shaped with care. Months of labor, hundreds of workers, endless inspections. That was how planes were built. But Ford looked at a B-24 Liberator and saw something different. He saw parts, 450,000 of them. If cars could be broken into components, why not bombers? If engines, wings, and fuselages could be standardized, why not weld them together on a moving line? To skeptics, it was fantasy. To Ford, it was simple logic. He had done it before. With the Model T, he turned automobiles from luxuries into necessities, from one car a week to one every few minutes. He built River Rouge, a plant that took in raw iron and turned out to finished cars at the other end. He had redefined industry once. Why not again? So he gambled. On a stretch of farmland near Ypsilanti, Michigan, Ford announced he would build the largest factory on Earth, a mile long, the largest roof ever constructed, a place that would not just assemble bombers but mass-produce them. They called it Willow Run. The scale stunned even Americans. 4 million square feet, 4 miles of assembly lines. Whole neighborhoods sprang up nearby just to house the workers. Highways were rerouted to reach it. Railroad spurs were laid to feed it. It was less a factory than a city. Inside, Ford demanded his vision become reality. He ordered engineers to design jigs and fixtures that would hold bomber sections in place like auto frames. He insisted that every part be standardized, every bolt interchangeable. "Build it like a car," he said again and again. But planes were not cars. At first, Willow Run was chaos. Workers trained on automobiles struggled with aircraft tolerances. Assemblies didn't fit. Fuselages jammed in the lines. Rivets were drilled in the wrong places. Completed planes failed inspection. Military officers grew nervous. "Ford doesn't understand aviation," they muttered. Some said Willow Run was a disaster in the making. Ford was stubborn. He doubled down. He brought in experts from Consolidated Aircraft, the original B-24 designers, to refine the process. He poured money into new tools, new training, new supervisors. He recruited thousands of women, many who had never set foot in a factory before, and turned them into welders and riveters. Rosie the Riveter became more than a slogan. It was the lifeblood of Willow Run. Slowly, the chaos found rhythm. Sections were prefabricated in parallel. Wings here, tail sections there. Fuselages rolling down rails. Modules snapped together with precision. What had taken months now took weeks. What had seemed impossible was becoming routine. By mid-1942, Willow Run began to deliver. At first, one bomber every few days, then one every day, then faster. The line moved. The dream was alive. But across the ocean, German commanders laughed. Reports of America's giant factory reached Berlin. They dismissed it as propaganda. "The Americans are dreamers," Luftwaffe officers scoffed. "They waste their time building monsters that will never fly." Even as bombers rolled out of Willow Run, Nazi leaders refused to believe the numbers. They trusted their spies, who told them America's workers were untrained, their factories inefficient, their unions disruptive. They could not imagine women in bandanas welding wings faster than German craftsmen. They could not believe a nation that built cars and refrigerators could mass-produce warplanes. But the tide was already turning. Willow Run was not just a factory. It was a symbol, the proof that America could mobilize like no nation before. The workers knew it. Each shift felt like a battle. Each rivet hammered was a strike against fascism. Songs echoed through the vast halls. Men and women worked nights, holidays, weekends. Floodlights turned midnight into daylight. The first Liberators lifted from the Willow Run airfield in 1942. Massive, 4-engine bombers, ready for war. For the workers, seeing them fly was vindication. For Ford, it was destiny fulfilled. Still, the gamble was not over. Ford had promised thousands of bombers. The Army Air Forces demanded thousands more. Willow Run had to run faster, smoother, harder, and it would. Within 2 years, the factory would reach a rhythm so shocking that German commanders, reading captured reports, would sit in silence. A bomber every 55 minutes. But in 1940 and 1941, it was still just a gamble. A factory under construction. A dream that seemed impossible. Henry Ford had rolled the dice. And the world was about to see what happened when the king of the assembly line turned his gaze to the skies. By 1942, Willow Run was alive. The noise was constant. Hammers, welders, the thunder of presses shaping aluminum sheets, voices echoing in the largest single-roofed building on Earth. A factory so big that weather patterns shifted inside it. 4 million square feet. 4 miles of moving assembly lines. Whole neighborhoods existed just to serve it. Workers called it the city under a roof. And inside that city, America was reinventing war. At first, it wasn't easy. Willow Run became famous not just for its promise, but for its problems. Workers new to aviation struggled. A car frame could be off by fractions of an inch and still drive. A bomber wing could not. Early B-24s rolled out with flaws. Some failed inspection, others had to be rebuilt. Critics pounced. Newspapers whispered about Ford's white elephant. Generals worried the gamble was collapsing. Aviation experts smirked. Planes are not cars, we told you. But the chaos did not last. Step by step, Ford's system tightened. Engineers designed special jigs that locked parts into perfect alignment. Fixtures the size of houses held fuselages steady, while workers riveted. Prefabrication became the key. Wings here, tails there, noses elsewhere, all assembled at the same time. Then the modules moved to the line, clicking into place like giant puzzle pieces. It was industrial choreography. Workers, many of them women, adapted fast. They learned to weld seams in awkward positions, to handle rivet guns as heavy as rifles, to polish metal until it gleamed. They worked long hours, 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. Floodlights made night indistinguishable from day. They came from everywhere. Farmers, secretaries, housewives, immigrants. Many had never held a tool before. Now they built bombers. Rosie the Riveter was not a symbol. She was thousands of real women, in bandanas and coveralls, turning bolts on machines that would soon thunder over Europe. And they were proud. Workers sang in the lines. Families bragged that they had sons in uniform and daughters at Willow Run. Each rivet, each weld, each bolt was a blow against fascism. The scale was staggering. The plant consumed enough steel to build entire cities. It devoured rubber, glass, and copper in quantities unheard of. Rail lines brought in raw material day and night. Convoys of trucks carried out finished sections. A runway stretched beside the plant so bombers could take off the moment they were complete. Willow Run was more than a factory. It was a front line, and it was not alone. Across America, similar miracles were happening. Shipyards in California launched Liberty ships in weeks. Tank plants in Detroit produced Shermans by the thousands. But Willow Run became the symbol, the beating heart of Roosevelt's arsenal of democracy. By 1943, the numbers silenced doubters. Willow Run was producing bombers faster than any plant in history. At first, one every few days, then one every day, then faster. The learning curve was steep, but once Ford's system clicked, it became unstoppable. Generals who once doubted now marveled. "It is like watching bombers grow from the ground," one officer said. Visitors walked through the plant wide-eyed. Senators, journalists, foreign delegations, all left stunned. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, German intelligence began intercepting reports. At first, they dismissed them. Propaganda, they thought. Exaggeration. No factory could do this. But the reports kept coming. By 1943, Germany realized it was true. They read the numbers. They saw the totals. Thousands of B-24s rolling off American lines. Faster than the Luftwaffe could shoot them down. Faster than German factories could replace their own losses. German commanders were stunned. The Luftwaffe had been built on assumptions of superiority, precision, elite training, aircraft crafted with care. But how do you fight an enemy who builds machines faster than you can destroy them? It was like fighting the tide, and the tide was rising. By late 1943, Willow Run's rhythm was unmistakable. The plant had become a living machine. A bomber nose sliding into a fuselage here. Wings bolted on there. Engines mounted, tested, and fired. Hour by hour, the line crept forward. Hour by hour, another bomber neared completion. The workers felt it. They began to measure time not in days, but in planes. How many did we finish this week became the question. The answer climbed higher each month. In Berlin, the shock deepened. German commanders studied photos of endless formations of Liberators. Factories burned in Bremen, Hamburg, the Ruhr. Trains derailed, oil fields shattered, and always more bombers came. "We destroy 50," one Luftwaffe officer admitted, and 100 return the next day. The numbers told the story. By the end of 1943, Willow Run had produced more than 4,000 bombers. That was more than some entire nations could build in the same period. And Ford was not done. The gamble had worked. The arsenal was awake. The flood was only beginning. What had started as chaos was now order. What skeptics called impossible had become routine. The line rolled on, steady, relentless, unstoppable. And in Germany's war councils, silence fell. The Reich had been prepared for courage, for sacrifice, for years of brutal fighting. But not for this. Not for a factory that built a heavy bomber faster than they could build a fighter. Not for an enemy that turned war into an assembly line. Willow Run was no longer an experiment. It was a weapon, and the world had never seen anything like it. Willow Run was never smooth at the start. Engines failed. Fuselages didn't align. Rivets popped. Whole planes had to be torn apart and rebuilt. Workers left in frustration. Inspectors shook their heads. Some generals whispered that Ford had overpromised and was about to embarrass the entire nation. In 1942, critics called Willow Run a disaster. But disaster turned to discipline. Ford engineers attacked every weakness. Jigs the size of houses locked sections into place so parts couldn't drift. Gauges measured tolerances down to the smallest fraction. Prefabrication lines multiplied. One shop built wings, another built tails, another produced control panels. Everything came together on the moving line. It wasn't art anymore. It was rhythm. A nose slid into a fuselage. Wings dropped onto supports. Riveters fired in sequence, hundreds of them at once, echoing like machine guns. Engines arrived by rail, bolted on, tested, fired. The line moved forward, always forward. Workers adapted too. At first, many had never even touched tools. By 1943, they were professionals. A woman who once typed letters now welded aluminum seams. A farmer's son who had never seen an airplane now wired cockpits. They took pride in their speed, pride in their precision. The scale was beyond belief. 40,000 workers at peak. 3 shifts a day, 24 hours of continuous noise. Floodlights made midnight indistinguishable from noon. Cafeterias fed thousands in minutes. Parking lots filled with cars as far as the eye could see. It wasn't just a factory. It was a battlefield. Every worker felt it. "My brother is fighting overseas," one riveter said. "I fight here." And the planes began to flow. At first, one every few days, then one a day, then faster. By late 1943, Willow Run was producing Liberators by the dozens each week. The B-24 was not an easy plane to build. Complex, heavy, filled with guns and electronics. Other factories struggled to keep pace. But at Willow Run, the impossible became routine. Workers no longer measured time in shifts. They measured it in planes. How many did we finish today? Every month, the number rose. The transformation stunned visitors. Senators, journalists, foreign officers walked the catwalks high above the line and watched bombers crawl forward like living creatures. They saw women in coveralls driving rivets with perfect timing. They saw sections the size of houses sliding into place with machine-like precision. They left in awe. Generals who once doubted now praised. "This," one said, "is America's weapon." Across the ocean, the Luftwaffe began to feel the weight. Reconnaissance photos showed endless formations of Liberators crossing the channel. Factories in Bremen, Hamburg, and Cologne vanished under waves of bombs. German intelligence intercepted figures. Thousands of bombers built, more coming. At first, they didn't believe it. But then, they saw it with their own eyes. A single raid could include 500, even 800 bombers. Entire skies filled with B-24s. Fighters shot some down. Flak claimed others. But the next week, the same numbers returned. And more after that. German commanders asked the same question again and again. Where are they coming from? The answer was Willow Run. Inside the Reich Air Ministry, shock grew. Reports said America had reached an output of a bomber every hour. Göring raged. Hitler refused to believe it. But the evidence was undeniable. For every Liberator destroyed, 2 more appeared. By 1944, Willow Run's rhythm was unstoppable. The plant no longer stumbled. It surged. A finished bomber rolled onto the runway every 55 minutes. Crews climbed aboard, engines roared, and the planes lifted into the sky, straight from the factory floor to the front. The gamble was no longer a gamble. It was victory in motion. German officers later admitted their despair. One recalled, "We destroyed 50 in a day." The next day, 100 returned. It was hopeless. Willow Run had turned war into math, and the math favored America. The chaos was gone. What remained was rhythm, a rhythm that never stopped, never slowed, never faltered. And that rhythm was death for Germany's war machine. By 1944, Willow Run had found its rhythm. The chaos was gone. The stumbles of 1942 were history. The endless adjustments, the broken rivets, the doubts, all swept aside. Now the line moved with precision, relentless, predictable, unstoppable, and the numbers stunned the world. 1 bomber every 55 minutes. Not days, not weeks, not months. 55 minutes. Think about that. In the time it took a German crew to brief a mission, Ford's factory finished another Liberator. By the time a Luftwaffe squadron climbed into the air, 2 more were rolling onto Willow Run's runway. For Germany, it was a nightmare made real. They had believed planes could never be built like cars. They had believed America was too soft, too lazy, too divided. They had believed the rumors were propaganda. But the evidence filled the skies. Formations of 500, 600, 800 B-24s thundered over the Channel. Factories in Bremen disappeared. Hamburg burned. The Ruhr lay under constant attack. And even when losses mounted, dozens of bombers shot down, whole squadrons shredded by flak, the Americans always came back. Stronger. Because Willow Run never stopped. Day and night, the line rolled. Workers pounded rivets in rhythm, welded seams, wired cockpits. Engines arrived by rail, mounted, tested, roared to life. Crews climbed aboard, and in less than an hour, another giant left the floor. It was not magic, it was industry. 40,000 workers, 3 shifts, floodlights turning night to day, cafeterias serving thousands in minutes, a plant so large that buses ran routes inside. To the workers, each bomber was personal. They scratched names on panels, Berlin Special, Ypsilanti Yankee, Rosie's Revenge. They signed their initials inside fuselages, knowing someone's son would fly it into battle. To America, each bomber was proof. Proof that the arsenal of democracy was real. Proof that no matter what Hitler said, the United States could outbuild, outlast, and overwhelm. To Germany, each bomber was terror. Intelligence reports reached Berlin. Willow Run is producing 1 aircraft per hour. Göring refused to believe it. Hitler raged. "It is lies! Exaggeration!" he shouted. But his officers knew. They had seen the skies. They had read the reports. And they were stunned. One German officer put it simply, "For every bomber we destroy, 2 return. For every squadron we break, another arrives. It is like fighting a factory, not an air force." That factory was Willow Run. By the end of 1944, more than 8,000 B-24s had rolled off its lines, enough to fill the skies from horizon to horizon, enough to hammer oil fields in Romania, rail hubs in France, shipyards in Kiel. enough to choke Germany's industry day after day without pause. And still, the line moved. 55 minutes. Another bomber. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, now fought a war of exhaustion. Pilots were young, undertrained, desperate. Fuel was scarce. Aircraft production lagged. For every Me-109 built in Germany, America built a dozen Liberators. For every squadron scrambled, 3 squadrons of bombers appeared. The imbalance was staggering. One Willow Run shift produced more combat power than an entire German factory in a month. 1 week at Willow Run equaled Germany's output of heavy bombers for a year, and Germany could do nothing to stop it. They bombed London, they blitzed Coventry, but they could not touch Willow Run. It sat safe in Michigan, beyond the reach of the Luftwaffe, untouchable by V-2 rockets, protected by an ocean, shielded by distance. For German commanders, it was hopeless. They could win battles in the air. They could shoot down squadrons. But they could not win the war against a line that built a bomber in less than an hour. Because this was not just production. It was tempo. The rhythm of industry. The beat of hammers, welders, riveters. The steady crawl of the line, always moving forward. The unstoppable tide of steel, aluminum, engines, and wings. A rhythm Germany could not match. By 1945, Willow Run was the beating heart of America's air war. Crews flew Liberators straight from the runway to training fields, then across the Atlantic. Squadrons formed overnight, the skies filled with bombers faster than Germany could even react. The gamble was over. Ford had won. German commanders, once confident, now spoke in whispers. Diaries revealed their despair. "We cannot fight against this," one wrote. "They build faster than we can destroy. It is the end." They were right, because in the time it took to write those words, Willow Run had built another bomber. By 1943, the skies of Europe had changed. At first, German cities heard the drone of a few squadrons, dozens of bombers, maybe 100. Dangerous, yes, but manageable. Then the numbers grew. 200, 300, 400, and then entire armadas. 500 B-24 Liberators crossing the Channel, 600, sometimes 800, filling the sky from horizon to horizon. To civilians on the ground, it was a storm. To German commanders, it was a nightmare. They had seen bombing before. London had burned under the Blitz. Coventry had been flattened. But this was different. The scale was overwhelming. The tempo unrelenting. Factories in Bremen vanished under tons of explosives. Rail hubs in Cologne collapsed into twisted steel. Hamburg burned for days, the firestorm so intense it created its own wind. And through it all, the Liberators kept coming. The Luftwaffe fought back. Fighters rose in waves. Focke-Wulf 190s, Messerschmitt 109s. They tore into the formations, cannons shredding aluminum, flames bursting from fuel tanks. Bombers fell. Crews bailed out. Parachutes dotted the sky. But the formations did not break, because Willow Run never stopped. Every bomber lost was replaced, sometimes in the same week, sometimes in the same day. One German pilot said it best: "For every bomber I shoot down, 2 return. For every squadron I break, another rises. It is endless." And it was not just cities. Oil became the target. The Romanian fields at Ploiești, lifeblood of the German war machine. Hitler called them vital. Without oil, tanks stalled, planes sat grounded, factories went silent. So the Americans sent the Liberators. In August 1943, they launched Operation Tidal Wave. 178 B-24s roared low over the fields. Flak shredded them. Fighters pounced. 60 bombers never returned. But the refineries burned. Production collapsed. And what stunned German commanders most? The losses didn't matter. Willow Run replaced them. The line rolled on. By the time the Luftwaffe celebrated the destruction of one raid, new squadrons were already in training, new Liberators already in the sky. The message was clear. Germany could bleed America, but it could not stop America. In Italy, the story repeated. Naples, Rome, factories, airfields, rail yards, all hammered day after day. Crews flew from North Africa, from England, from new bases carved into the Mediterranean, always B-24s, always in numbers too great to count. By 1944, Germany lived under constant bombardment. Every day, somewhere, the sirens wailed. Every day, workers ran for shelters. Every day, commanders stared at maps filled with arrows, bombers inbound, bombers returning, bombers ready for tomorrow. The psychological effect was enormous. German civilians lost faith. German soldiers cursed the skies. German commanders admitted what they had once denied. "We are not fighting squadrons," one said. "We are fighting factories. Factories in Michigan, factories in California, factories in Texas." And Willow Run was the giant among them all. When D-Day came in June 1944, the role of the Liberators was decisive. Before the landings, waves of bombers tore into rail lines, bridges, and defenses across France. On the morning of June 6th, more than 2,000 bombers flew in support of the invasion. Among them, hundreds of B-24s, many built at Willow Run. German defenders looked up from Normandy beaches and saw the horizon black with planes. They fired, they fought, they prayed, but the bombardment crushed them. After D-Day, the tempo only grew. Day after day, the Allies sent bombers deep into the Reich. Berlin, Dresden, Munich. Industrial cities turned to rubble. Armies at the front starved of fuel. Trains never arrived. Supplies vanished. And still the Liberators came. For Germany, it was suffocation. For America, it was proof. Proof that Willow Run's gamble had worked. Proof that mass production was as powerful a weapon as any gun or bomb. By the end of 1944, more than 8,000 B-24s had flown into combat. They dropped more explosives than any bomber in history. They flew more missions, covered more miles, and delivered more destruction than the Luftwaffe could ever hope to counter. German commanders were stunned. They had built their air force on precision, on elite training, on carefully crafted machines. But all of it meant nothing against a tide of steel that never stopped. The skies were no longer German. They belonged to Willow Run. By 1944, German commanders were no longer confident. They were stunned. The skies they once ruled were gone. The Luftwaffe, once feared, now bled daily. Pilots too young, fuel too scarce, bombers too many. And the reports from intelligence grew darker. One bomber every 55 minutes. They read it. They repeated it. They refused to believe it. But belief didn't matter. They could look up and see the proof. Formations of Liberators stretched from one horizon to the other. Day after day, week after week. Endless. How do you fight that? Some tried to answer. New weapons, new tactics. The jet fighter Me-262. Fast, deadly, able to rip through bomber formations. Hitler called it the wonder weapon. But it came too late. Engines failed. Pilots untrained. Factories bombed. Only a few hundred ever reached combat. Against thousands of Liberators, they were a drop in the ocean. Others turned to flak. Anti-aircraft guns lined every city, every factory. Black clouds filled the skies. Bombers fell, yes, but always more came. One general admitted bitterly, "We shoot them down by the dozens, they return by the hundreds." Desperation spread. Underground factories were built, hidden from bombers. Laborers, many of them forced prisoners, worked in tunnels to produce weapons, rockets, jets, V-weapons. But none of it changed the sky. The rockets terrified London, but they did not stop the bombers. The jets burned bright, but could not be built fast enough. The flak batteries roared until barrels melted, but the formations never stopped. German diaries captured the despair. A Luftwaffe officer wrote, "We are not fighting men, we are fighting factories." Another, "It is hopeless. They build faster than we destroy." The truth was everywhere. At the front, soldiers cursed the skies. At home, civilians prayed as sirens wailed. In command centers, officers stared at maps filled with arrows. Hundreds of bombers inbound, hundreds more tomorrow, thousands behind them. The lesson was brutal. Bravery could not match industry. Skill could not stop rhythm. A nation built on blitzkrieg now faced an enemy built on production, and the numbers were merciless. By 1945, America had produced over 18,000 B-24 Liberators, more than any heavy bomber in history. Many rolled straight from Willow Run. Germany could never match it. Even their most ambitious plans, jets, rockets, superweapons, were strangled by bombing. Oil gone, steel gone, rail lines gone. In the end, commanders admitted the truth. One wrote after the war, "We lost not in the air, but in the factories. Willow Run defeated us as surely as any general." Another, "We prepared for courage. We prepared for sacrifice. We were not prepared for a bomber every hour." The reflections were bitter. The Luftwaffe had begun the war in triumph, soaring over Poland, France, and the Low Countries. By the end, its leaders stared at the sky in silence, powerless before the thunder of engines. The lesson was clear. Industry was the true weapon, and Willow Run was the proof. August 1945. The war was over. Germany was rubble. Cities burned, railways twisted, factories silent. And the skies, silent too. The Luftwaffe was gone, its commanders broken, its planes destroyed, its pilots dead or prisoners. But in their reflections, one truth stood above all. They had lost to production, not to bravery, not to tactics, not to a single battle, to Willow Run. The numbers told the story. 18,000 B-24s, one every 55 minutes. 8,000 from Willow Run alone, the largest output of any heavy bomber in history. For German leaders, the shock lingered, even after surrender. They toured American factories in the 1950s. They shook their heads in disbelief. Even in peacetime, the scale dwarfed anything they had known. "We fought a giant," one admitted, "and we did not know it." For America, Willow Run became legend, a symbol of the arsenal of democracy, proof that ordinary men and women could change history with hammers and rivets. Workers who had never flown built the machines that won the skies. Housewives, farmers, immigrants, all part of the assembly line that defeated fascism. They wore bandanas, they packed lunches, they punched time clocks, and they built bombers that crushed an empire. Every 55 minutes. The lesson was simple. Courage matters. Leadership matters. Tactics matter. But without industry, without rhythm, without the ability to replace losses faster than the enemy can inflict them, you lose. Germany learned that lesson the hard way. The Luftwaffe began as the terror of Europe. It ended watching helplessly as waves of liberators reduced its homeland to ruins. And, for German commanders, the memory never faded. One wrote in his diary after the war, "We thought we could break them, but we were wrong. They built faster than we could kill. We were defeated not by planes, but by the line that made them." The line at Willow Run. For historians, Willow Run became more than a factory. It was a turning point. The moment industrialization fused with aviation. The moment war became production. The moment the assembly line reached the sky. It reshaped the Cold War. It redefined strategy. Nations now knew whoever could build fastest would win. For the men and women of Willow Run, it was personal. They remembered the long nights, the endless shifts, the roar of engines on the test runway. They remembered the pride of watching a bomber lift off, knowing it would fly to Europe, to the Pacific, to history. Some never left Ypsilanti. Others carried the memory for decades. Many never saw the planes again. But they knew what they had done. They had built victory, one bomber at a time, every 55 minutes. And for German commanders, that was the final shock. They had dreamed of conquest. They had unleashed war on the world. But they had not understood what they faced. Not just soldiers, not just planes. An entire nation turned into a factory. The arsenal of democracy. Willow Run.